Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin. A good number of people have shown up. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Chris Neidl. I am the co-founder of the OpenAir Collective, and I'm one of your hosts today. Happy to be supported as well with some promotional support from the Direct Air Capture Coalition. Hopefully in just a few moments, we'll also be joined by our friends from Boulder County and the city of Flagstaff, who are the key founders of the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition. What we'll do is go ahead and begin with the presentation. The focus of today is going to be to do two things. One is to introduce you to this new coalition, the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition, which was started by Boulder County, Colorado, and the city of Flagstaff, Arizona, with support from the OpenAir Collective. So we want to give you an overview of what this new coalition is, and then talk directly about our initial initiative, which is going to be a RFP related to CDR, or carbon dioxide removal utilization with concrete. So I'm going to go over both of those two sections for you. Again, just want to point out that the origins of this initiative, and again, hopefully we'll be joined by our team members from there shortly, really came out of the existing local work of Boulder County, Colorado, and Flagstaff, Arizona, which have been among the first local government jurisdictions in the US and probably in the world to really embrace and incorporate carbon dioxide removal as part of their overall climate emergency initiatives and strategies. And so what we're doing today, and what we'll be doing this summer actually, is beginning our first pilot project under this new coalition, which again is a request for proposals for projects that link carbon removal to concrete locally within those states, as well as Utah and New Mexico, which I'll explain. So what we'll do is I'm going to just go over what the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition is, what its goals are, a little bit about the history, and the method and approach that we're putting forward in order to catalyze development and innovation within the carbon dioxide removal space. And then I'll get into this first opportunity that we're exploring. This is one that we really need your information and input on, because we're hoping that the focus of our initial effort will be on the linkage of carbon removal with concrete. But that really depends on the kinds of responses and information we're able to collect over the next few weeks. It's possible that we might broaden the scope of that a little bit if we feel like that's necessary. And then I'll just go over a little bit about what our request for information is. We'll be circulating by email to all attendees, as well as dropping in the chat just the form that we would love to get your input for. The companies that are CDR companies, or companies that are carbon utilization or CDR spaces linked to concrete. Would love your information, as well as your questions and ideas, which will help inform the RFP that will be released later in the summer. And then as time allows, we will have a little bit of a discussion Q&A. But again, the request for information, as well as we'll provide our emails, will give more than enough opportunity for you to submit comments and questions after the webinar. So just a little bit of a background on Four Corners, as I said, which I'd like to start in terms of what's motivating it. I know a lot of regular members and participants with the OpenAir Collective, as well as the DAC Coalition, are obviously very familiar with what carbon dioxide removal refers to. But this, we think, is a really solid definition that we often operate with. And carbon dioxide removal, or as it's called, CDR, or sometimes just carbon removal or negative emissions, these are a range of different activities that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, ocean reservoirs, or in products. And those of you who are following this closely, and it's hard to avoid at this point, particularly if you're involved in climate-related activities, it's become very clear in the last few years that all pathways that really maintain a livable climate over the course of this century, in addition to dramatic decarbonization and adaptation to inevitable climate change, also are going to require the removal of emissions from the atmosphere that have already been emitted on an enormous scale, gigatons or billions of tons per year as we get deeper into the century. This is from the UN IPCC 2018 AR report, and it's been restated more forcefully in subsequent reports, including most recently in March. And so removal is now part of the overall picture to responding to climate change and the emergency, as I just laid out, side by side with reduction of emissions and adaptation. It's not a substitution for it. It's in a different position right now where we need to be ramping up decarbonization and adaptation efforts on a massive scale right now, really over the course of this decade. We need carbon removal has to play a larger role as we get deeper into the century, by mid-century, and then certainly towards the end of the century. But that doesn't mean that we can remain idle right now, because in order to make CDR pathways that are affordable, environmentally and socially acceptable by that time when we need them, we have to be starting yesterday. So we have to be ramping it up. As we've seen with renewables and other climate tech, it takes a long time to stand these technologies up so that they can actually scale. So we have to be starting right now. And so over the next decade, really what we're looking at, this is a pivotal decade. We have to, by 2030, really have a portfolio of technically proven options that are also socially acceptable and vetted, and that they will be commercially available so that they can actually scale up and play that role. And underlying all of this, obviously, is affordability. We really have to bring down the cost of really potentially high impact CDR solutions. And over the course of doing that, it's not just the solutions, but our ability to actually certify and monitor that they're working, that we're able to actually depend on forms of carbon dioxide removal that wouldn't have happened otherwise, that are also durable and permanent and not easily reversed. And then we also want to have a better sense of what are the net benefits of these solutions? What are the costs and risks associated with them? And what else do they bring that might be beneficial in addition to the removal of carbon dioxide? So this is really our task for this decade. And today, right now, what we have to be doing, it's key to start getting some of these different solutions out into the world, particularly ones that, at least theoretically, have a really high upside, have really high potential to remove a lot of carbon. But we have to be getting those out right now in demonstration projects so that we can learn, adapt, and ultimately spread them. And as we're doing it, build trust and acceptance in the places where these solutions will have to be implemented. And so what the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition is really rooted in is an idea or a question of what is the role of local governments in this mission. You hear a lot when you hear about climate in general, particularly carbon removal specifically, more of an emphasis on sort of global policy and national, and sometimes the local doesn't get talked about. And this is something that when you look at the work of Boulder County, Colorado right now, and Flagstaff, Arizona, and a growing number of local jurisdictions in the United States and globally, you see that there's an alternative, view of the role of local governments that's starting to be demonstrated through their actions. Boulder County first identified carbon removal as a potential part of its overall strategy back in 2018 as part of its environmental sustainability plan. And then just this year, it launched the Climate Innovation Fund, which is a really unique program that Boulder County has started that's going to directly support local initiatives that remove and sequester carbon dioxide. So they're the first local government that I know of anywhere in the world that has done a similar type of thing of directly putting its resources to advance carbon dioxide removal locally, but with ripple effects beyond its borders. Flagstaff, Arizona as well, last spring, it incorporated carbon dioxide removal. It was actually supported by its city council in its carbon neutrality plan. And it's already done the math, which a lot of local governments are doing ahead of higher levels of government, of how much, in terms of reaching their overall neutrality goals, how much can be accomplished by direct decarbonization and how much is going to need to be left for carbon removal. And Flagstaff has already started to do the math, and it's about almost 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide by 2030, they're estimating. So when OpenAir entered the picture, we actually began talking with Boulder and Flagstaff separately. They're amazing teams there to find out more about what they're doing. And that conversation then became really more of a planning conversation. There must be other local governments out there that are actually considering this, that should be working together and aggregating their ideas, their lessons, and their resources to really make local government an early force in driving carbon dioxide removal progress. So our conversations began almost a year ago, last summer. And again, one of the things that we questioned, as I said, is the assumption that there's sort of a hierarchy of importance that starts from the highest levels and sort of scales down when we think about such an enormous problem like climate change and such an enormous undertaking like scaling up carbon dioxide removal. But not only through the work of Boulder and Flagstaff, but also through our research, that's just not the case, really, when you're talking about solutions across the board, environmentally and for climate, and certainly for carbon dioxide removal. The real data really suggests that the way that things move forward is through a more polycentric, dynamic approach where you have all levels of government really kind of functioning in serving different roles and interacting with each other to push things forward. And the local has a really specific and important and creative role to play right now in carbon dioxide removal. And just to summarize that, as many of you know who are representing local governments, who are active in local climate advocacy or policy, it's really the local governments, the municipalities, the towns, the counties, the tribal governments that tend to move fastest and make these commitments the earliest. And what we see now is that just in the United States alone, there's over 3,000 cities, towns, counties, tribal areas, local governments that have at least made one formal commitment to addressing climate change. So there's an enormous scope of local government activity that's happening fast and is further along than activity on higher levels of government. It's also local governments are uniquely accountable to the public that they serve. This is where the rubber hits the road. And so local governments often are where solutions have to be actually implemented and where the public has to be engaged to get their ideas and support, which is quite different the higher up you go in levels of government. And this is critically important. Those of you who are actively involved in carbon dioxide removal know that it's a contentious subject. There's a lot of controversy around it, a lot of misunderstanding about it, and a lot of legitimate concerns. And we're not going to be able to really get to where we need to get with carbon removal by just imposing it from on high. If we want to get mass social acceptance, it really has to move from the ground up. You need to have the ideas from the local, the vision and understanding from the local, and the guardrails that are formed at the local, we believe, in order to really achieve social acceptance. And then what we've also seen, if you look, this isn't just in the United States, but globally, some of the most creative policy responses or programmatic responses to climate change can actually be found at the local level. And those often inspire or bubble up to shape higher levels of policy at the subnational and national levels. And then lastly, and this is becoming more and more true all the time, is that local governments are not acting in isolation. They're listening to each other, they're partnering with each other, they're sharing notes and understandings and best practices, and increasingly they're collaborating. And so that is the key to sort of premise of the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition, is that together, by aggregating and working together, local governments can have a massively impactful role. And so what the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition proposes to do is exactly that, is to draw in local governments on the regional level together to come up with ways to directly support carbon removal innovation and to do it now. Again, to use that characteristic that we've observed with local governments is the ability to think and move quickly. And so we need that right now with carbon dioxide removal. The coalition is based on some key principles. One is, again, the collective, that we want to see CDR emerge from the ground up to get the ideas from the local, support from the local, and understanding from the local to help shape the trajectory that CDR actually takes. The other is, and this is actually a good example of some precedents. I come from a solar background before I entered carbon dioxide removal. And we've already seen a lot of innovative work in climate that operates with the same principles, things like community solar or solarize, group purchasing models, or community choice aggregation. These all have their origins really at the very, very local level. And they all entail aggregations of collective will and resources to help drive adoption and innovation in favor of good climate outcomes. The other is to really focus not just on the math of how many tons need to be removed, et cetera, et cetera. It's really to focus on the particular need that we have is how do we support CDR projects that have high potential but aren't happening yet and that are also replicable. So the real onus here is on let's get those first of kind projects, second kinds of projects up and running as fast as possible. That's the real priority, particularly in these early years of the coalition. Again, as we said before, we want the solutions that we propose and advocate for to arise really from a dialogue with local stakeholders and through a real analysis of what do local places have that could potentially be leveraged to create new models for carbon dioxide removal and even new technologies, but also at the same time, really recognizing that local governments are under serious constraints, not only in how to deal with climate change, but more generally in terms of fiscally and in terms of their authorities and powers. So we want to make sure that whatever we propose here is appropriate for local governments to implement and support. And then most importantly is do no harm, is that whatever types of carbon dioxide removal innovation that our coalition gets behind and supports, it cannot come at the cost of any members of our local communities, both within our coalition jurisdictions and outside. So we have a firm do no harm line, but also we want to promote solutions that also offer other auxiliary goods. In the act of pulling carbon out of the air, what else can actually be afforded or offered through the solutions that we choose for the environment and for people? And so our approach is novel in some ways, but also draws on some models that already exist. Really where we want to focus, as I just referenced earlier, is catalyzing demand and support for novel, high potential CDR projects. We want to be the spark that helps those projects go from paper into the real world as quickly as possible so that we can learn, adapt, and scale them in future years. Now, some of you who are following carbon dioxide removal, this has been a big couple of months. There has already been activity in the private sector led by companies like Stripe, Microsoft, Shopify, and others around what's called advanced market commitments. This is basically corporations buying or committing to buy carbon dioxide removal from innovative companies that are technically ready, but don't yet have a market. So the idea is to establish early demand and market for high promising solutions so that they can get out into the world and continue to get cheaper, better, and more better understood. Now, the public sector, as we've seen in the last 6 months, is beginning to actually follow the inspiration of the private sector. Public sector historically has used procurement dollars in all sorts of strategic ways to promote innovation, both within the environmental and climate field and outside. And so public monies can actually be used to procure carbon dioxide removal as well and become an early adopter that helps create a market and generate early scale. In New York State, OpenAir has been principally involved in the introduction of the Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act, or CDRLA, which is a bill that actually proposes to do that. New York State buying carbon dioxide removal projects within its borders. And a similar federal bill by the same name was introduced just 6 weeks ago by Representative Paul Tonko in New York and Scott Peters in California, which looks to do a very, very similar type of thing. So Four Corners wants to sort of take some of the pages from that approach, generally speaking, but it has a somewhat different angle, because what we realize, unlike state governments and federal governments and large corporates, local governments alone won't necessarily be able to muster or generate or bring to bear the kinds of resources that can get these kinds of projects going. So what we're doing is what local governments are increasingly doing in other areas, is combining forces and aggregating our demand and jointly making decisions for certain common carbon dioxide removal projects that would be located within the same regions, within municipalities, towns, and tribal communities. Now, just to reiterate, the primary goal, impact goal that the coalition has, at least in these early years, and certainly with the pilot that we're running this summer, is to, again, catalyze funding that's going to let those first of kind, high potential, scalable, replicable projects happen. A secondary but important impact is also, we will be accounting for, is how much CO2 is actually going to be removed as a result of the projects we select over a 12-month period. So it's both innovation and the carbon removed. And so the initial one, this is where we get the name from, is going to be focused in the four corner states of the United States. So that is Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. And right now we have our founding members of Flagstaff and Boulder County, and very productive conversations with other founding members in both Utah and New Mexico, which we're excited about. And so this is where our pilot is going to concentrate projects in this 4-state region of the United States. And what we want to do is combine, as I said, the financial resources that will allow us to procure or provide catalytic gap funding for CDR projects within that 4-state region. And again, being sensitive to the limitations or constraints that local governments have, the idea is that the contributions from individual members will be relatively small and manageable, so it won't compete with other higher order fiscal needs in those places. But in aggregate, by collectively adding them together, we will attain a large enough level of financial resources that we can bring in that will allow for these types of projects to happen. There'll be 2 phases to this initial pilot, and this is the model that we'll be experimenting with for future solicitations. One is the selection of a CDR pathway and partner, and then expansion. And just to explain those, for the first part, for selection, we want to recruit 4 core members, 1 from each of our 4 corner states. And these members, they could be municipalities, again, counties, towns, will actually be directly participating in the RFP process later this summer. So the writing of it, and then the ultimate selection of partners for this. So they're very much at the decision-making table. And each of these jurisdictions will have to pledge a minimum of $25,000 for as part of the catalytic fund. So we'll be starting off with a $100,000 catalytic fund that will be available to support novel CDR projects. The second phase that happens after we select our partner at the end of the summer and our project is that there's a much larger pool of local governments that will be interested in participating, but maybe didn't have the mandate or the bandwidth to participate as core members. So we're going to be spending a 3-month period recruiting and really trying to sign up other members in other jurisdictions in these 4 states that will also be able to come in and contribute directly to the fund. And for amplifiers, as we call them, for this second wave of members that will join, they can either make their commitment through a direct public allocation from public funds, or through a 3-month crowdfunding campaign where individuals, businesses, or institutions within that jurisdiction will be able to help raise that $25,000. Or it could be some combination of this where there's a match from the public based on the crowd fund. And just to wrap up with our timeline, right now, this is what we call an opportunity notice, where we're just alerting the public and those who have attended today of this opportunity, this RFP that will be coming later on in the summer. And we're just finalizing the other 2 members of our core member coalition who will be involved in selection. And then in June, we will be, at the end of today and circulating it by email, you'll be able to look at our request for information form. It's just a very basic Google form, quite short and concise, through which we'll collect more information to confirm that the focus of our RFP is valid and that we can proceed with it. And then at the end of June, we'll be releasing our RFP, actually on July 1st. And that will begin a 3-month period or a 2-month period from July to August, where we will be receiving submissions by August 1st. So there'll be a 1-month period. There'll be a scheduled webinar as well to go over the details of the document release. And then for August, our core members will be reviewing the different submissions that have come in, doing some follow-up and potential interviews, and then ultimately selecting a single provider who will be our partner for this program to implement the CDR projects. And then we will have that 3-month period of amplifier recruitment, which will be September, October, and November, where we'll try to maximize participation and contributions from other local governments within the Four Corners region. And then following that, we will actually commence with the project period. And the project will need to be delivered within 12 months of December 1st. So basically by December 2023 is when we want projects to go in the ground. And then one of the key things I want to just focus again is the emphasis on replicable, scalable CDR innovation. We want to be the coalition that helps drive new types of projects into the world. And that will include a range of different things over time. We want to look at those types of solutions that, again, have high potential, but those can range from so-called nature-based solutions all the way to more high-tech solutions, including ocean carbon dioxide removal solutions as well. There's a growing number of them that we're finding out all about all the time. And we hope that the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition will help drive innovation in each of these domains in regions throughout the United States. Our selection criteria, again, very much focused on how innovative is this solution or deployment model? Is this doing something new that wouldn't happen otherwise? How replicable and scalable is this solution? What co-benefits does this solution offer to the communities in which it's going to be located? How much does it cost? Obviously is key. What is the actual carbon that would be removed on an annual basis if these projects were to be implemented? And we'll also score it in terms of its durability, permanence, and reversibility score of the solution that is proposed. And in terms of the way that projects that will be eligible can be selected, there's a couple of different ways that this can happen. It could be a centralized solution that is located within one or two areas of any of the four states in close proximity to the jurisdictions that are part of our membership. And then all of the different members in the Four Corners will be providing grant funds for that. So it can be relatively centralized, or solutions can be distributed in one, more, or all of the jurisdictions that represent the membership of the coalition. The way that this will work as well is that the solution and the partner will be jointly selected by that core membership group, but then individual contracts will be signed with the individual jurisdictions, which will provide their commitment fund to the solution provider. As I said before, we want projects to be implemented within 12 months once we have our total coalition formed around this opportunity. That includes the Amplifier locations. There will be a 12-month period. So this allows us to extend a little bit more time for those solutions that are very, very promising, but might be just a little bit further out from being able to deploy. And then lastly, what do we want to do following the pilot? This is a pilot, so we want to discover a lot. We want to test sort of our major theses here and some of our assumptions. But the idea is once we do this, can the Four Corners be a platform for regular solicitations that are inspired by other jurisdictions throughout the United States and potentially based on different themes or possibilities that are particularly pertinent or of interest within those regions. And then to just do these on a rolling basis. So if we get, starting off with our Four Corner Coalition, if a year from now we have coalitions that have emerged from folks in the Cascadia region in the Northwest, or in the Delta region in the South, or in New England, we would like the Four Corners to be the platform where those types of RFPs can be released and submissions can be accepted and projects can ultimately be initiated. And what we're excited about that kind of a platform is, over time, as more and more participants are involved in more and more RFPs and projects are realized, is to create a coast-to-coast community of practice where all participants, existing and new members, can learn from the experiences of other members. So lessons learned, questions, cautionary tales, and best practices will all be shared and posted on the Four Corners platform. So that is an overview. Again, you can see there's some novelty to this approach, but yet it also links up and aligns with some of the dominant demand support models that we see in climate tech and increasingly in CDR. Now, to talk about what we're aiming to do for this first pilot in the Four Corners states this summer is the linking of carbon removal with concrete production. And the reason why we're interested in that, and if anybody's a follower of OpenAir, there's a bit of an obsession within OpenAir with this possibility. And we like this because concrete is local, it's ubiquitous, and it's potentially a really interesting medium for storing carbon dioxide. And so why concrete? To give a little bit more detail there, it's the second most used material on Earth after water. We no one knows exactly, but globally, there's between 35 billion tons of concrete that we produce every year. And it's also essentially an irreplaceable material, particularly within a meaningful time frame for climate action. It has just unique performance cost characteristics and is so embedded within the building practices that it's all but impossible to really eliminate. In fact, we'll be using more of it over the next 3 decades. And again, as I said before, the key thing that really draws us to it as a local government-led initiative is that concrete, by its very nature, is produced locally. It has to be just built into the material. It has to be located within 50 miles of its use. So as a result of that, there's around 7,000 ready-mix concrete plants spread throughout the United States. Every community has them, 500 or so block or precast production facilities as well. So they're in our communities and they're part of our communities, and that's an attractive profile for this project. One thing just to state up front is to just make a distinction between concrete and cement. These are obviously important linked materials, but they're not synonymous. Concrete is made up of several different materials, of which cement, or the most common form, Portland cement, is the most common kind. And Portland cement is the binding ingredient that basically you're able to combine sand and gravel, which we call aggregate, air, water, and some other ingredients, and make concrete. And it allows it to have all the unique structural properties that it has. But cement is also very much at the core of the climate question around concrete. A lot of times people talk about the carbon footprint of concrete, and that really is traced directly to cement. While cement is only 10 to 15% of the mass of concrete, it's typically about 80% or 90% of the emissions. It's one of the most carbon intensive industrial processes on the planet. And altogether, globally, it represents about 7 to 8% of global emissions, which is, if it was its own country, it would be the 3rd highest emitter. So it's a large emission source in its own right. But what's exciting about it is it also has unique characteristics that are now being augmented through new technologies that also allow for concrete to potentially be a medium for durably and permanently storing carbon dioxide for long periods of time. And so this is through a natural process that is already part of standard concrete called carbonation, where it within the alkaline material within concrete automatically over time bonds with CO2. So concrete actually over a multi-decade period sucks carbon and fixes it over time. Now, many different new technologies and approaches are actually amplifying or augmenting or front-ending that capability, actually. And this is what we call carbon utilization in concrete. A lot of you have probably heard the term carbon tech. These are technologies that use carbon in ways that are pro-climate and generate economic value. Of all of the different areas of carbon tech that are emerging, it's fair to say that those that relate to concrete are probably the most mature at present. So this is a subfield that is already very much in development. And again, what we like about it is if you're putting carbon dioxide into concrete, it's chemically fixing it for long periods of time in ways that are comparable to geological sequestration. So it's a utilization that also removes and fixes carbon. And when you look across the types of solutions that are already coming to the market or in the market, there's a lot of different ways in which carbon dioxide removal plugs into concrete materials and methods. So these are novel forms of cement, alternatives to Portland cement, that actually utilize and fix carbon. There are types of substitutes that already exist for cement called supplementary cementitious materials, or SCMs. We're seeing different products and methods that actually embed carbon in some of the common forms of SCMs like slag and fly ash. We are also seeing forms of aggregate, which make up the largest mass of concrete, that are actually made of CO2 or partially made of CO2 that can be mixed or that can displace sand and gravel and be added to concrete. We also see in the curing process at the end of concrete production, the ability to actually inject carbon dioxide directly into carbon, which both reduces the water content and displaces CO2 or cement, while also locking carbon forever away into it. And then some more novel post-waste applications that we've learned about that are being commercialized, which is using actually waste concrete or the alkalinity that is in it is a soil amendment for agriculture that not only fixes carbon, but also actually improves soil productivity. So that just gives you a sample of some of the various ways that carbon dioxide we're seeing is intersecting with concrete at various different phases. And so when you look at that from a CDR perspective, that means potential opportunities for direct air capture technologies that pull carbon directly from the air. Could that carbon be added to concrete production or concrete component production? Materials like biochar, which are natural materials, there's exploration of using those as materials within concrete to strengthen them and make them more durable and to substitute things like cement. And then enhanced weathering, which I just referred to in that agricultural example, where you're using basically concrete dust and you're weatherizing it, which draws down carbon dioxide, which is fixed for multi-decade or century periods. And so for this first solicitation, which we're looking for, and this is why we hope to get more information from folks who are on the call, particularly those of you who are in the carbon removal space or in the carbon utilization space in concrete, the types of solutions we're looking for are those that utilize or realize carbon removal at any point across the concrete supply chain. So from cement manufacturing all the way to final pouring of concrete, individual solutions that can be incorporated at each stage that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We're also looking for the utilization of carbon negative materials. I just referred to biochar as materials that can be added to concrete and fixed within concrete. And then also solutions that use concrete waste, which is quite abundant. I believe there's a statistic that up to 5% of all concrete that's made is just thrown in a bin. So can we use that in a way that has a regenerative value, but also removes carbon dioxide? So these are the three sort of buckets of solution eligibility that we're looking at. Perhaps there's other ones that we're not considering that we can find out from you all. And when we think of what we're going to be selecting, as I referenced at the beginning, the point here is to really enable types of projects to happen that wouldn't happen otherwise or wouldn't happen as fast otherwise. And so what we're really paying for is the ability to enable those projects. But we're also going to be looking at if there's certain projects that are not about building a plant, for instance, but are actual carbon dioxide removal projects. We're going to look at how much CDR is occurred in the course of 1 year as a result of that project. And then just to end on this, what we would like your help with, again, because we're not certain that the request for proposals that we put out this summer is going to necessarily be able to be so narrow in scope. Through our market research and our conversations, we believe that there are opportunities to do one that's solely based on carbon dioxide removal, but we really need to hear from you all about your solutions, your readiness level, and really to get your questions and ideas so that we can make the most viable and successful RFP that we can later in this summer. So Jason is going to drop just the form, and this will be circulated to you by email by tomorrow morning, along with a recording of this session. It's very simple. It's not a very, very long RFI form. It's just a Google form that just is looking to get some general company details and some details about your solution and your readiness level and your operating environment. But we also want you to be able to ask questions and also to submit comments so that we can factor those into the ultimate RFP that we release later this summer. Submissions for the RFI are due in about 2 weeks, June 1st at the end of day, 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And then we will actually provide responses to those questions 10 days later on June 10th on the end of the day. And we'll actually publish those publicly on our forthcoming website so that everyone can benefit from the answers to those questions. Now, if you're not a company, we know from RFP or from our RSVP list today, there's a lot of different people that join the call. If you're a representative of a local government who has questions about or is interested in possibly joining the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition, or if you're a citizen who's interested in potentially recruiting your local government, your town or municipality or county to participate in it, just email me directly. And that's my Gmail. And Jason is going to post this. And again, it will be circulated again tomorrow morning because we'd love to hear from you, your questions, your ideas, because ultimately your involvement is what's going to allow this to spread. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and pause. Again, some key dates here. We're going to be keeping the RFI open for the next couple of weeks. We're hoping to release the RFP by July 1st and select a partner by September 1st. Those are subject to change based on the input that we get from the RFI and if we have to expand or change the scope of the RFP. And then we'll get into that amplifier recruitment period in the fall, which will be quite exciting. So with that, I will go ahead and stop. And I think we do have some time for some questions. But before I do that, I want to see if my two partners, they are Susie and Nicole. We have Susie Strife from Boulder County, who's the executive director for the Boulder County Office of Sustainability, Resilience, and Climate Action. And then we have Nicole Antonopoulos from the City of Flagstaff's Office of Sustainability, who are really the key inspirations for this project. And I wonder if I could just invite Susie and Nicole to turn on their cameras and their microphones, and we can maybe just hear from you quickly.
Susie? Hey there. Well, thank you, Chris. That was an amazing overview. That was incredible. I'm just here as a supporter, and obviously it's been one of the highlights of my career to initiate something like this at scale. Local governments can do a lot for their communities for supporting climate action and resilience. And this is so important to us because what we do locally is a drop in the bucket in terms of emission reductions or supporting carbon removal. But if we can band together and get sort of more local governments engaged in this, that's when I think we can really have a larger impact. And we're just excited to be initiating something new and something very powerful that I think the rest of the nation will be soon to follow in terms of our colleagues across different municipalities. So we're just really honored to be here. And it's been a wild and awesome year of trying to initiate this great coalition. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Great. I'll just also add too, I think Jason may have added it, but Boulder County, under its Climate Innovation Fund, already has a really exciting local RFQ and RFP process going for innovative carbon dioxide removal solutions that could be implemented in the greater Boulder area or in Colorado. So I know Jason submitted that. So we're certainly learning a lot from that process, and this is occurring in parallel to that. So that's really exciting as well. And Nicole, would you like to add anything?
Absolutely. And just building off of Susie's comments, first of all, Chris, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and overview. And as Susie mentioned, our commitments here, for example, in the city of Flagstaff to achieve carbon neutrality in 8 years, carbon dioxide removal is a majority of our work and our tool set to move this initiative forward successfully. But we also see this incredible opportunity for alignment with business development. And as we've done our work in the community to bring our carbon neutrality plan forward, that was something that we heard a lot from the community of what business opportunities are there. As we know, it took a lot of trillions of dollars to put these types of emissions into the atmosphere. It's going to create trillions of dollars worth of industry to remove it. And with that in mind, we are really excited about this opportunity to collaborate with our neighbors. We are hoping that this is a model and something that can be scalable for other communities. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nicole and Susie. Really appreciate it. So again, we've dropped the RFI document, relatively simple. Let me start with the question from Dal Winters. Sorry, Dal, that might actually, in fact, be a little bit of a typo. So we'll go ahead and fix that. If there's somewhere in the form that suggests that it's DAC solutions only, that is not the case. We will select along those broader criteria that I said. So we'll go ahead and make that modification. But just for now, know that the solution that you're describing there is a very exciting category. The integration of biochar and other natural CDR solutions as a concrete material is an exciting one. And that's certainly one that we want to find out more about. So please do submit. I see Rob has some really interesting questions. Rob, I should say in my day job, I'm some of the questions you've asked are sort of the primary thing I focus on, concrete, cement, and industrial decarbonization. And so I just want to be very clear that what we're proposing here is not in any way an alternative to any of the key decarbonization pathways that you very exhaustively listed here. All those things have to happen separately, and there needs to be separate policies. I know in Colorado, for instance, is one of the leading states actually in implementing decarbonization policies with its GEM rule. We're seeing that pop up all over. So just want to be very clear that this isn't a sort of get out of jail free card. What we're looking at are what are interesting ways in which any aspect of concrete production can be leveraged to take carbon out of the air, not avoid it. One of the things that I will say, which is a little in the weeds, but there'll be more information when we get to the RFP stage, is that when we do think about co-benefits for this project, that will actually include avoided emissions as well. So if you have a solution that is demonstrably pulling carbon from the air, that's obviously the threshold that you need to reach in order to be eligible. But we also, if it so happens that you're displacing Portland cement in the process, or in any ways reducing emissions associated with concrete or cement, that will also be considered actually in our selection criteria. And this is linked to your question around greenwashing. Again, as we make clear, and we'll continue to always make explicitly clear, what we're proposing with carbon removal is not an alternative to reducing emissions as rapidly and as completely as possible. Our program here is just anchored in the fact that we have to do carbon removal in addition to those necessary things, which also includes adaptation. So the way that we structure our request for proposal, the way that we review our proposals, and we're learning a lot already from what Boulder County and what Flagstaff are doing, is really going to be calibrated for that. How do we really advance and accelerate carbon removal, but not at the expense of these other essential climate goals? So unless I'm missing some of the questions that may have come through in the chat, which I can look at, I was just looking at the Q&A. And I don't know as well, Susie or Nicole, if you had anything else. I mean, I know, Susie, you're working really close with Carbon Direct and, one of the leading carbon removal science and consultancy firms, which are helping us create that framework so that we avoid exactly the kinds of things that Rob was talking about. But certainly, if you have anything to add to what I did in terms of our priorities or intended method, certainly do.
No, I think you've covered it all. Really, honestly, I just think this is an invitation to be a part of something pretty new and very innovative. We have had a lot of success as a local government working in coalitions before, just in our own state. And so we're trying to model that sort of pooled procurement, pooled purchasing power, pooled citizenry power across multiple states. So this is something extraordinary. And I think it's going to have a huge impact at scale once we're off and running. And this is just the initiation of it. So consider this our pilot year. And this is a momentous occasion for us to announce officially what we would love to do this year. And we really want you involved. So I would just look at this as a real amazing opportunity.
Great. And just one last question. Thank you, Susie. And I just to build off of that, as I said in the presentation, is what we're really excited about is how do we get creative ideas rolling from a particular place and then evolve from a pilot into a platform with wherever you are in the US. And ultimately, this could be a replicable model globally. How do we allow local governments to converge, come up with a sort of a target goal for CDR and run RFPs and select partners, and then share that information with the world on an ongoing basis. And then again, the power is always in the conversation between different actors. So I think there's just a lot that local governments can offer, and that's what we're trying to demonstrate here. And in terms of the scope of it, one of the questions from Kevin, it's going to be a minimum $100,000 catalytic fund for a project. That would be the sum total of the 4 core members that we're going to launch with. But as I mentioned, we then want to go out and recruit a much larger secondary group of members once we've selected a solution and a partner, and try to recruit those over that 3-month period at the end of this year. So it's hard to say what it's going to be, but we do actually really hope to have, this is very similar to Solarize, those of you who can recognize it, or community solar. those of you who are really interested in this, wherever you may be, will have a specific solution to really offer and to potentially promote in your area. And whatever partner we select, we really look at them as a partner once we've gotten to that point, to help really demonstrate the technical details and all the different facets of that solution as part of our outreach. So we anticipate we'll probably get quite a good response to that.
And I'll just add to that. What a great question, Kevin. As $100,000 is a seed fund, but we are looking to add to that year over year, as well as potentially secure some philanthropic dollars to that, as well as resident dollars who want to contribute to larger scale CDR, the advancement of CDR. So I think there's a real opportunity to see this as, again, just sort of the start and initiation of something that will grow in quite a large magnitude, which we're hoping for. And we're in early conversations with some philanthropic hosts or fiscal sponsors, if you will, that are very, very interested in seeing this succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I really want to give, this was really inspired by the work of Flagstaff in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, which when we found out about that, it just really, on the OpenAir side, really lit a light bulb and said, there's really something here. And then the real magic happened when we connected Susie and Nicole and other folks on the team, and immediately we're on the same page, and we all recognized from a local vantage point, this could be a really big deal this decade, and really making things happen. Not just scale, but new ideas, and new ideas that are really guardrailed around goals of fairness, co-benefits, and equity. And so we think that this is going to be a really creatively important part of the CDR story this decade. So please do take a look at the RFI. If you're a provider who's interested, please share your ideas and your information. We made it very concise to maximize the input. And again, if you're a representative of a local government anywhere, or if you're a citizen who wants to try to get your local government on board for this, do email me. I'll add it again. You can email me directly at my Gmail, and I would love to talk to you and give you some more information and have you be part of this effort. So with that, I don't mind ending 4 minutes early. That's fine for me. We can go ahead and stop. What I will do is I'm going to just go dark, and I'll leave the Zoom open for the next 5 minutes or so that anybody can go up and pull a link from the chat of any of the resources that we mentioned. But anything else, Nicole or Susie?
Just massive thank you to the OpenAir Collective and Chris. You've been instrumental in making this happen. So we wouldn't be here without you. And just thank you so much.
Thank you.
And being our cheerleader and being kind of the glue to make this happen. So we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And thanks everyone for carving out time in their day.
Thank you so much. And we're just getting started. So we look forward to your responses, and we look forward to the summer. So thank you, everybody. And thank you. We'll sign off now. And again, I'll leave it open so that you can copy your links.